Thank you very much, Annette, and thank you all for your time. Again, my name is Brian, and my research broadly focuses on using remote sensing to study ecosystem services. As we're all familiar with, the climate is changing, and due to relentless carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, the world is getting warmer and warmer. Fortunately, forests are important at mitigating some of these effects. A healthy natural forest, as we see here, does a great job at absorbing carbon as a carbon sink. And when we look at the world's forests, billions of tons of carbon are taken in annually. But this leads to the question, how much carbon is in a tree? Or how much carbon is in a forest? Answering these questions are pretty straightforward, but actually surprisingly difficult. I'll tell you why. To measure a tree's carbon, it's exactly as you think it would be. Folks go out into the forest, they cut down a tree, they let the wood dry, and then they measure every aspect of the tree from the roots all the way up to the leaves. It's very intensive work, but from this work, they create these mathematical models called allometric scaling equations. These help us if we know, for example, the diameter and height of a tree, estimate the overall biomass of the tree itself. Now, we can scale this up to many trees when we incorporate tree density, but this gets a bit more difficult the further and further we zoom out. Enter remote sensing. Every second of every day, we have thousands of sensors orbiting the Earth, collecting data on many different aspects of the Earth's surface, including the world's forests. And many fantastic scientists have created some really solid data products looking at forest carbon and tree carbon and changes in carbon on the Earth's surface. Unfortunately, a lot of these data products are often plagued by pretty high uncertainty or error. Additionally, a lot of these models that these folks create are constrained by the low amounts of reference data they use. If we recall all the effort it takes to measure a tree's biomass, imagine scaling that up. That gets really, really difficult. And this is where our project comes in, tremendous changes. Using advancements in machine learning, remote sensing data fusion, and this unusual but very large ground data set that we have access to, we believe we can help reduce uncertainty and take advantage of this really unique data set. Now, when we think about remote sensing, there are two types of remote sensing that we use for this project. You might think of optical remote sensing when you use Google Earth, for example, or Google Maps. We see these images from space. These are literally giant cameras strapped to satellites. And they're great for what they do. They take very comprehensive coverage of a landscape. But sometimes we run into a couple limitations. For example, this image on the left, we see a tree. But is that really a tree? It could be a bush. It could be the world's largest chia pet. Who knows? This is why I use active remote sensors called synthetic aperture radar. How active or SAR works is it shoots out radio waves, which bounce off the Earth's surface and then return back to the sensor. There are a couple different types of SAR sensors, which dictate kind of the length of the wavelength of the radio wave that it shoots out. So I use X-band SAR, which means it has a really short wavelength, which means it cannot penetrate the upper canopy of a tree. And here I use X-band to give me a good idea of how much density there is in the upper canopy. I also use C-band SAR, which has a bit longer of a wavelength and can actually penetrate the upper canopy. And that tells me just the density and carbon biomass of the mid-canopy, and then returns back to the sensor. And finally, I use L-band SAR, which is a bit more powerful and has a bit more wavelength, and it's able to penetrate the upper canopy and the mid canopy and give me a good idea of how much biomass is in the trunk of the tree itself and on the ground. Now, when I combine all these three SAR sensors with the optical, it gives us really great comprehensive coverage of a forest structure. I use Google Earth Engine to access all of my data, and I do all of my data pre-processing, resampling, and preparation for ingestion into my machine learning algorithms using cloud computing. Here's a snapshot of what some of these quote unquote raw data look like. I create these really dense time series that I like to call data cubes. Kind of looks like a data cave almost. And the top layers here are my SAR sensors. They're all in gray. And I have these optical sensors data here, including Sentinel-1 or Sentinel-2, blue, green, red, et cetera. To train my machine learning algorithms, I'm using reference data collected by my partners, ARAUCO, and scientists at ARAUCO. ARAUCO is actually one of the world's largest timber producers. And scientists at ARAUCO have actually gone out and measured the carbon biomass of more than 1,000 trees in Chile, mostly eucalyptus and Monterey pine. They are also collecting thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of data points of trees across the entirety of Chile, which goes on to help train my machine learning algorithm. And here's some initial results from this project. As we can see here in this heat map, we get pretty great wall-to-wall estimates of what carbon accumulation looks like on the ground. If we see some of these yellow circles here and here, we see areas of really dense, high-growth forests and the corresponding carbon accumulation on the ground. If we focus on some of these barren patches here and here, we see these are areas of forests that have recently been clear-cut and harvested of their timber. And we see that reflected in these low biomass pixels down below. We can actually zoom in and get a better view of some of these forest parcels. Again, some of these brown spots of barren ground, barren soil with no carbon biomass. And this visual, for example, helps us identify carbon stocks or accumulation of carbon across the landscape, capping out at almost 500 megagrams or tons per hectare. Another really cool aspect about this project is the ability to track change over time. So between 2019 and 2020, again, we see these bare areas of soil where the trees have been completely harvested. And we actually see this change in our data product, where red areas are areas that have been completely lost and harvested of their carbon, and blue areas are areas where we actually see carbon growth or accumulation. One interesting aspect about this project that was completely unexpected was how great our algorithm was at identifying forest degradation. And so often what a lot of these timber producers do is they go in and they prune and they thin forests to promote greater forest growth and faster forest growth. And we actually see some of this pruning operation going on here. Between 2019 and 2020, a lot of this forest parcel was pruned, and we see some of these more barren areas. And this is actually reflected in our change data, which is really exciting. And one aspect of this project that I'm most excited about is the transferability and the open source nature of this project. Oftentimes, we are constrained by data, as we mentioned, and a lot of these models are constrained by data. Folks just don't have as much data to train models as we do. And so using some of our machine learning approaches, we can actually transfer this model from our study area in Chile to other forests across the world, including the DRC, including the Amazon. All we need to do to kind of fine-tune this model is incorporate some local training data. Additionally, there are a lot of broader implications this project holds, forest management, forest ecology, and conservation broadly. Again, we're really excited about the forest degradation aspect and identifying forest degradation, hopefully globally. Additionally, with the incorporation of SAR data, we can explore forest structure more fully instead of just a binary presence-absence of forests. Finally, I think this project has a lot of great implications for climate change. Most importantly, accurate carbon accounting, especially as carbon markets mature, and we need a good idea of how much carbon lays across a forest parcel, for example. In addition, we believe this project could assist in efforts in reducing emissions from forest degradation and deforestation, or RED. And finally, I'm most excited as a forest ecology to study the effects of climate change on forests. So, for example, exploring the effects of climate-driven events such as megadrought and wildfire, and how changes in forest structure occur due to these events. And to summarize, I believe we've created a really great above-ground biomass change and carbon products that many folks can use. We're really excited about the transferable and open source nature of this project and having other folks use it broadly. And finally, we believe this has broad implications for the fight against climate change. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I thank my mentors and supporters. Thank you.